Well, good to see you this morning, Lipi. Here together, beaming from different corners of the universe almost, sharing one of our passions, the importance of education in change management for line of business, really. I think the bulk of the comments that we'll make will be CRM, but it is a much more broadly relevant concept. And of course, change management is key to success of the project overall. So we've got education leading to change management, or success in education leading to success in change management, leading to success in the project overall, I think is a fair summary of what we're going to
Absolutely, Gill. Delighted to be sharing the platform with you. So this is the first time, and it's absolutely brilliantly summarized. And as you know, it's a change management is a passion. And I have worked quite a lot related to digital transformation, starting with a business transformation, but change management is key. And it's also about the perception, how you see the change management, which organization you talk to. So we will unravel that in more details when we take step by step into this session today.
Sure. So maybe we should, just to make sure we're absolutely on the same page, what exactly do you mean by change management?
Well, change management, if you start with an organization, how do you manage the change? How do you implement Dynamics 365? Or could be any solution. How do you prepare the organization first? Because that's the key outset. You have to think about what is the intention the organization is having the solution, bringing in, and what do they want to change? What is a key pain points? What are the key challenges they want to address? And that's where it starts. It starts with preparing the organization, preparing the workforce. And then it's also about the strategy in terms of how you define the change and how long the change will go and how you handhold people, how handhold workforce, or sometimes within the organization, you would take some people to do it. What do you see and how do you feel about the change management from your perspective of rolling out Dynamics?
It is definitely that, as you summarized, in that whenever people like you and me and our other colleagues in this space go into an organization to help them, they are obviously in a situation. One has to assume the fact that they're bringing people like us in, that situation that they're in is less than desirable. Otherwise, why would they be bothering? And we need to assume that they have a vision for a different situation, which in their opinion is better. So what we've got is we've got the current situation, less than desirable. We've got the to-be vision situation over here. So what do we need to do to get a set of users, which may be half a dozen, it may be into 3 or 4 figures, who are doing their jobs in this situation? Undoubtedly, they will have some gripes and moans and groans because they're humans and normal, and that's what people have. How do we move them from here to this vision in the future so that they are happily adopting, using, understanding the benefits of what is new in this situation compared to the origin situation or the source situation?
Very interestingly, you touched upon the point about, moving from A to B, and they might be moving from A to B to C, but how they define that journey. And in your, while you were talking about moving from one point to another, you talked about the benefits. So how do you want to bring that conversation with the users about what kind of benefit do they usually get from whatever they will be doing in the different mode?
I think what is very, very important is to see it from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're not foisting something on them. So we need to get inside their shoes, understand what their pain points are on a certainly per user group, and probably even a per person basis. What do they need to achieve? What are their pain points? What sort of techniques can we use to take that individual with those challenges and issues to point B? And yes, point B may well be almost a brief stop on the way to C, D, and E. But if we don't get to B, the probability of us getting to C, D, and E with those individuals is very, very slim.
It is interesting, isn't it? And we can bring in so many different kind of perspectives. Me coming from the background of, working with lots of users in UK and also different countries as well, how important it is to bring in the culture and the organization culture. It's not the country culture, but it's also the organization culture, because it depends on if it's a multinational organization or multiple country rollout we are working on, then the culture also plays the part in terms of understanding the whole perspective of why we are doing it.
Absolutely.
So what's your take on that? What kind of experience have you gathered with the culture? So shall we take that a bit, talk about the culture?
I think that's very relevant. But where I would differ with you a little bit, Lipi, is almost the implication that that doesn't become an issue unless you're multinational. I think, particularly here we are in the 21st century, so many organizations, and not necessarily larger organizations, not even multi-office organizations, can have almost subcultures within them, just groups of people who share maybe roles, maybe ideologies. It may, of course, come in from non-work aspects of culture. So we may have a group of people who have got something in their outside of work background in common that influences their feelings and thoughts about how things move forward. So because we're not multinational, we're not multi-office, we've only got 20 team members, whatever, they certainly need to be considered. Yeah. And only when they've been considered with the people in that situation can we rule them out as not being relevant. We should assume they're important.
It is very interesting because it's about what you were talking about. Only 20 people could influence and having that work culture outside the work. And the culture is like multi-layered. And in terms of, it can slice and dice, and we can look into all through different lenses of what kind of cultural background these people or commonly share in between them. And that influences the overall perspective. So yeah, go on with that experience if you can explain a little bit more about what have you seen, what further have you seen?
I've seen lots of areas where if all of those aspects about culture and personality are ignored, we can get to a point where you're just never going to achieve success. It's almost as though you've started climbing a mountain and you've got partway not very far up and you, due to some bad planning, you meet an enormous brick wall. And getting over that brick wall, it really doesn't matter how nice you believe the mountain on the other side of the brick wall is, or the view from the top is, that brick wall is going to stop you completely. So it is far better to anticipate the possible brick walls and plan a route that therefore takes you around the obstacles rather than heading straight for them and then trying to deal with them. Because once you've got that taste of failure, you're bringing it back to success is really hard.
And in this kind of scenario, I must say that when we talk about culture, how hard you plan and how much details you plan, you definitely need to have different kind of perspective brought into the planning, because resistance will be there, and that's why it is change management. Resistance comes from different groups, and it might be based on what they're working now. There is a danger, there is a fear of learning something new. It might be coming from that factor. It might be coming from loss of jobs. That could be another fear. So there might be multiple factors that would be driving this kind of resistance, and no planning is perfect, because you have to address those kind of resistance as and when you come through, and you have to look into it more details and see what can you do to deflate it, or talk about that, and understand what is in it for them, for the users, so that they can work as a unit, they can collaborate with each other. So yeah, it's very pertinent and pervasive to the fact that how it impacts on the overall implementation or training, or the overall benefits that it can deliver to the overall program.
Yes.
So what's your next passionate thing moving from culture within the change management? And we can pick that one a little bit more.
I think, well, it's not only within a change management umbrella, but across the project as a whole. I am absolutely passionate about education, which is somewhat broader than training, as a key part of delivering the success of that project. So education in all of its forms will help achieve success right the way through, from the inception of the project through all of the delivery aspects, all of the testing, through to the end user, and even the post-go live support, which of course is almost certainly going to be overlapping with the next chunk of the journey. So going back to that journey from A to B to C that Lipi and I talked about earlier. And right now, we haven't put a time frame on that. All we've said is that we're currently at A. We see a stop point at B and a further stop point at C. For each of those, there will be some development, some testing, some end user training, some documentation, some post-go live support, and therefore the journeys will overlap. And that's something that certainly delivers a level of complexity. And we need to bring all of that in. We need to understand the fears, and you touched on this earlier, Lipi, the fears of all the individuals involved with each of those steps. What are their fears? How can we allay those fears? How can we, using education, help them overcome those fears, so ultimately they will come on that journey willingly? I think here it might be worth broadening and explaining to the audience why education and training are different. So I won't delve into training at this point, because I suspect that everyone on the course knows what a training course is. most people have probably experienced good ones and less good ones. But under that umbrella of education, as well as training, we have mentoring, we have self-teach, where a user is reading for themselves. We may even have large-scale presentations, such as a conference, where you've got, and this is something I do and Lipi as well, in other areas of our business, you may meet us on those stages speaking to large audiences. All of those, and probably others, fall under that umbrella of education, and all of them can be useful in terms of helping people overcome their fears, their reticence from moving from A to B, and thinking that when we get to B, this bad thing's going to happen, that bad thing's going to happen.
Absolutely. It's education, it's awareness, it's about training, and training could be in a different badges, we can say, but it's all about education. It's all about preparing the workforce in terms of why they need to do it, what they need to do it, and also to create a forum where they can talk about their fears openly. If you can talk about the fears, then you know how to address it. Then you know you can talk to your peers, or you can talk to about what is going to happen. And this can help the journey of the program. And you touched upon, Jill, it's like talking from the very beginning, preparing, raising the awareness, be it talking in different forums, talking to the senior leadership, talking to the end users. It might be internal users, or it might be users who are not going to regularly use the system, but they might be having some kind of impact on the overall perspective. So they should be also be aware of what is there and what's coming. So it's educating, but it should be a continuous education. So rather than, because some organizations have done it at the very beginning, like C-suite leader comes in, and when they start the program, they have like very big program launch. And after that, the communication has been somehow forgotten. And that's where this communication gap, or the communication creeps in, different kind of communication happens at that point in time. So if the communication is not regular, which is about the education, about what's happening, if we keep on continuous education to overall entirely whoever is impacted, then that can help smooth the journey of the overall program. It's the bumps will be there, but you can actually target those bumps, so you would be able to anticipate what's coming. So raising those kind of issues in different forums. And sometimes I've seen the casual forums are very much useful. Nowadays, obviously, we are all working from home in a remote way, but having a coffee conversation, it's really helpful, because then you're not just sharing your fear, you're talking about with your peers, you're talking about somebody, and you're trying to engage that in a way, but you are able to bring that conversation as a feedback and try to do something about that conversation. So yes, education is very important and very pertinent at what point and what junctures you do those educations.
So I completely agree with you. I'm going to take a little bit of a, certainly not a U-turn, but certainly going off at an angle. We've said that during this journey from A to B, we need to do a lot of education, and there's going to be a broad range of education, from some of it targeting the C-suite, some of it targeting middle managers, some of it targeting end users, some of it targeting frequent users, some of it targeting infrequent users. How do we sell, in quotes, because there may not be any money per se associated with it, but how do we sell the training, the education to all of those groups of people? Because there is absolutely no point providing it, investing in it, developing it, all of the rest, if I, as the trainer educator, am going to be training an empty room or a nearly empty room.
So do you start this program? When we start the program, it would be very useful to bring those into the planning, to say that this is the way of communicating and having a regular forum, regular communication, rather than selling that as a training or education. It's about having an open conversation. And I think open conversation is much more useful when it is a two-way, because then people can participate, they can talk about it. Sometimes we term it and badge it in a way, because training is more about, this is how you do things. And education is more about, raising the awareness. But if it is a two-way, I think that's very useful. And again, getting the feedback from all different divisions or groups, how they perceive education, how they see, because organization culture is also important, because sometimes you would see some organization would consume the communication in the form of newsletters, or somebody might be having their own intra channel, so they might be consuming that information through that. So it also depends on the organization culture. So bringing some of it rather than doing it in one way, having a multiple layers built into the whole program, into that journey, that kind of helps. And that's how it's more sellable compared to if you say that as a training or as an education. Because why would we need education? First of all, there will be always some users who would be really interested and keen to get their hands on to the new shiny system, and some challenges will always be there, a certain group of people. So it's trying to bring all different kind of modes of communication and the way of conversation that can help going forward. Do you agree? Do you see that happening?
I don't see it happening as much as it should, but I certainly agree that it is a path for success. I use a lot of analogies when I'm speaking and training. And the analogy that came to mind as you were talking then, Lipi, was if we want to feed a large number of people, we are far better providing a buffet, or as the Swedes would call it, a smorgasbord type environment, than a single dinner tonight is this, take it or leave it approach.
Yeah.
If it's a buffet where, please head over there, we've got this and we've got this and we've got this, help yourself to whatever appeals, is going to much more likely to be successful across that large number than this is what we're doing, take it or leave it approach. And then, of course, you get into the old carrot and stick analogy, telling people you must go on this course. Next Wednesday, you're not doing your job. Instead of that, go up to level 9 and into the training room, and you will get 3 hours of this trainer telling you all about the brand spanking new system, is unlikely to be successful.
Yeah, totally.
For a lot of reasons.
And also, we must also think about every business has their high peak seasons and different timing of the year that they cannot do. So again, the journey, the planning session should be taking care of all of it. But given the fact that even if you have taken care of all those different scenarios, different dates, but there will still be a situation where the users will be, if you do it, and you have rightly said, Gill, because if you try to say take it or leave it, then it's not a path to success. But if you try to bring it in a way that they can collaborate and they feel it's there for them, and that's the more positive way of implementation or getting that education, getting that communication through different channels. So yeah, definitely.
And different channels also helps the different ways that people learn, both in terms of their successful learning and their preferences. Some people are very, very comfortable sitting, being lectured to, and they have a memory where once they've heard an expert go through talking through the points, whatever the concept is, there are other people who, same presentation, would come out of it thinking, well, what was all that about? I am no wiser. I would have been far better just staying at my desk and carrying on with whatever I could have done, which I'll now have to work late to complete. Other people need things to be visual. Yet other people need things to be very, very practical. So if they don't get the opportunity to do whatever we're teaching them, they're going to be leaving the room thinking, why did I bother? Now I have to work late to finish something different. So there's another reason for providing variety, so that we are meeting all of those different needs. Also, variety of time frame. Some people learn really, really well early in the morning. Other people tell them they've got a training course at 9 in the morning, and you'll be very lucky to even get them there. And if they're there, they'll be quietly snoring in the corner, and they would have been much better being on a course that starts at 3 in the afternoon.
Exactly. And it also I just wanted to touch upon the point about the maturity, because we are talking about here about educating and raising the awareness. It's also about everyone brings their previous knowledge about, I have seen this CRM in my last place. It didn't work well. It didn't do the job. So I'm all having this negative perception about it won't do the job for me here as well. Or some people might have seen a different implementation, and I'm not talking about Dynamics. It might be a different technology within the organization, and it might not have been rolled out very well. And that kind of perception also sticks until the point of, oh, this is another new solution. This is another new system. So it will be the same as previous one. So it's very difficult to get through that, because there will always be a group of people who will hold that kind of perception or their knowledge about what has happened previously. And they would bring that along.
And everything you've said again, Lipi, is true. But we've got this individual who had whatever bad experience he or she had. We can tie this very nicely back to that earlier point about culture and subculture, because that individual could have coffee, metaphorically or literally, with other colleagues. And in those unofficial meetings, they can say, this is never going to work. We had System X in my previous job. I know what your job involves. System X is never going to help you, my friend. It was absolutely awful. And so that goes on. So now we're not dealing with one or two people who genuinely had a bad experience. We're dealing with a much bigger group of people, some of whom had a bad experience, the remainder of whom are now getting a second-hand bad experience. But nevertheless, they are all now convinced that System X, regardless of what we do, can't possibly deliver any benefit to them.
It's all spiraled into very big agenda of how it would not work. And sometimes it's very difficult to gauge that kind of conversation until you have a regular conversation. And even if you have a regular conversation, it might still come through, because all of a sudden this spiraled into that negative feeling of what didn't work well or what is a bad experience. And I've also seen this kind of not only derails, sometimes it derails a program even, because this bad experience holds so long, and it's more about, this doesn't work in this organization. So obviously we have to think about, it cannot be done in the same way, or it cannot be done in this organization. So sometimes it can derail the program, and sometimes the program can take longer time frame than you have regionally anticipated, because you have to reduce this kind of noise and take those feedback, put some actions around that to see that it is moving in a pace that they can control, and bring into the fact that in a positive feeling to move forward from A to B or B to C. So
yes.
totally.
And something that I use to overcome these problems, and in lots and lots and lots of other areas of my life, is as soon as somebody raises one of those negative, it can't possibly work. I saw this in my previous job. My brothers used System X, and I know what he said about me. And now, of course, we're dealing with third-hand bad experiences. My favorite 3-letter word is why. So I will really push into and get people to explain in their words why System X won't work, didn't work, can't work, and so on, because that is going to give you a lot of ammunition to then overcome all of those issues. Whereas when you're just working with, he over there said it can't work because in his previous job, which by definition is going to have been a different previous job in a different cultural environment, on the one hand, that can poison the current efforts. But once you go in and start getting the reasons, then you can unpick those and use what I call silver bullets, and say, right, we know we've got a fear that System X won't work because in System X, the data is always crap. So when we do a physical mail out, and this is a true story from one of my prior clients, when we do a physical mail out using System X, 50% of those with the associated budget are going to be returned to sender. Well, we can then go into that and explain that that problem is not related to System X per se, but to the quality of the data. And then we can both put in place steps to make sure that the data quality, the addresses and so on are correct. And we can bring those users on the journey where they can be involved in the testing, so they are reassured that the data is a lot better. And therefore, to continue the same analogy, when we do the first physical mail out, it will not have a 50% return to sender rate.
So you have to, it's a very intelligent way of doing it. What you have just addressed is taking that silver bullet, put some action and get that user to prove at the point that it is working fine now. And so what you have referred as silver bullet, we refer that in the program side as like risks. So all these kind of red flags are basically risks raised by the users or risks raised by somebody. So every risk need to have a mitigation, and this mitigation need to be a proper communication channel, need to be discussed thoroughly. Because if the risk is residing in one person or one group of people, it soon becomes a spiral in a different direction. So you need to catch those red flags. You need to catch those risks, have a mitigation in place. And the mitigation could be like not only one way. If you have a discussion about this risk mitigation, you might be having a assessment about the risk mitigation to see that which works and which doesn't work, and which works for this organization. And if it is related to data, as you have rightly said, it's about what are the key actions that we need to do to mitigate this kind of problem. So the risk management mitigation meetings are quite important, along with the user group, along with whoever need to be involved, steering group or this, the main crux of the team and the group who are responsible for moving forward and being involved into the whole program. So another point, I would just moving into the other direction about the volume and the variety of things when you come to do a business transformation. You might have come about doing one thing in a different way in dynamics. So how do you tackle that as part of the training or as part of education?
Again, I come back to why. So we've got in dynamics, or I tend to use system X so that then we can't be accused of pointing too many fingers. I will show people both we show them the how, but we give a very strong back channel explanation of why. So whenever I am training, I use a methodology, I suppose. That's possibly not the right word. Something that comes from Bernice McCarthy called format. So in every component of the education, we are addressing the why this concept is important. What does this concept mean? And what is it? What does it mean? How do we achieve this concept? So it might be something as little as, in order to, and let's take a ridiculously simple example. In order to enter a contact into System X, you have to go to this menu option, choose that, you'll get this form, then you put first name in this field, you put surname in this field, and so on and so forth. And then you don't stop there. The final piece is perhaps the most important piece, and Bernice McCarthy called that the what if, what else. In other words, if you fail to do all of the stuff that we've discussed earlier, what will happen? So if we loop back now to our address example, if we don't put the correct address in for this contact, the physical mail outs that are an important part of the business model of the company we're talking about are going to have a high level of return to sender, which in itself means that the people aren't getting the information. So what does it mean when the people don't receive the information?
Absolutely. And this is a very good analogy of to think about what if, because it's not necessary that you have to do everything on day one, and also to break it down into what you need to do on day one, week one, or month one. And from that, you can build upon the fact that what else need to be done. So not everything need to be done on day one, and people get overwhelmed, users get overwhelmed. And sometimes it is not a good adoption, because if you try to do a lot of things in 5 different ways of learning how to do things, if they find it like LinkedIn, Facebook, all this intuitive solution, nobody had to go for a training to do it. We know it because it's the ways of how intuitive the product was. So I think Dynamics is also a very intuitive product, and people would know, once they know what their day job is, once they try to do it, they will find out a different way of doing the same thing, rather than sitting there in the training session and getting to know that, which becomes much more overwhelming. So yeah, I think we are running about 45 minutes or so. If there are any questions from the users, we definitely would like to know. If you have any questions, put that in the chat window. Didn't see any question coming through. So how about the organization size? How does it impact on the overall implementations? I'm just trying to, if there are any questions we can answer, or maybe we can just touch upon if the organization size plays any part in the transformation journey. What is your view, Gill?
I think without a shadow of a doubt, organization size is important, because we see a number of different things. Larger organizations are more complex. than small organizations. Larger organizations are more varied. Again, we can go back to the buffet analogy that I talked about earlier. A
Yeah.
buffet to feed 100 people has the possibility of having far more dishes and far more choice than a buffet to feed 3 or 4 people. In fact, a buffet to feed 3 or 4 people starts to become difficult if we're not going to have waste. We've then got all of the number of subcultures. But another area that often gets forgotten is in a larger organization, often the variety within the role of each individual person becomes much smaller. In a small business, almost without exception, every team member wears multiple hats, and team members are able to cover for each other. And therefore, the general awareness of the organization as a whole on a per person basis is much bigger. Whereas we've got this large organization with several hundred or even several thousand staff members. Each person only knows their role, maybe a bit of the roles of their immediate team, and their knowledge of those in the other office, those over in another country, might be almost zero. That also means that said person looking at System X might say, it would be much better if System X had feature blah. Obviously, that's coming from their perspective, their role. However, what is the effect of feature blah going to be on that team over there, those in that office in a different country? So all of that, and then you need to potentially explain to the person that wanted feature blah, not only we're not giving you feature blah, but we're not giving you feature blah because the effect of that on those and those people is going to be whatever it's going to be. So again, it's awareness raising and bringing people along, so the knowledge and experience of the group as a whole grows and grows.
And it also impacts on the decision making, because the smaller organization wearing multiple hats may have the decision making done much quicker. However, the bigger the large scale organization, and with your example of the requirement gathering analysis, that itself the workshop, how many number of workshop you need to do, how many varieties, how many nuances you have to take into consideration before you can think about, okay, this is the unified process, and who is the decision maker to sign off that requirement as a blah given by one area. So that itself need to lay out a lot of governance in set, because then you would need to have the proper decision making process about gathering requirements, gathering, scoping, and decisions done that this is what you are going to, this is a spec basically, what you're going to build on that spec. So yes, it's complex, and it takes more time, and obviously need to be laid out in a proper controlled manner to take that into consideration. And transparency is also another important part, because obviously in this age we can use DevOps to bring all that requirements into one place, and having that visibility across multiple groups, multiple teams, multiple countries, but have to have some kind of sign off on the scoping, on the requirements before you start, before the team starts building, or the SI or partner starts building on those requirements.
Yes. And it's always much easier and cheaper to pick up and fix an error earlier in that whole process of dot point requirements through to design, through to building, through to implementing and having related data. So I think we have reached the end of that time,
Yeah.
Lipi. So maybe we should hand
So-
back to Lynn to wrap all of this up and
Yeah.
sweep
Thank
us
you,
out
Gill.
of the
It was
way
a
for the
lovely
next
time
people.
having this conversation, and over to you, Lynn.
Okay, Lynn is on mute. Okay.
Okay, so should we just drop off then?
I
guess
I
so.
think
Yeah.
we've gone.
Sorry, just also helping with in-person session on this side. Yeah, thanks for coming up for presenting today. I will ask Rami to stop the recording, and we'll try to process this recording as soon as possible. And he will share it on the YouTube and post it on the LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Lipi. Great to talk to you.